The Nigerian economy, or fragile economy, is heading towards an imminent collapse. Well, people are talking about that, looking at the projections and reprojections, as the Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation has warned that it will not make any remittances to the Federation account, and that's been cleared in this press release. Now, according to the National Oil Company, the decision becomes necessary in order to bridge the gap between landing costs and ex-coastal price of petrol, to ensure the continuous supply of petroleum products to the nation and guarantee energy security. The payment of subsidies has been a controversial subject in the management of the nation's oil resource in the last decade. While many Nigerians have called for its removal in order to enable the government to invest their funds into developmental projects, others have condemned such calls, citing it as perhaps one of the few benefits the masses enjoy from government. Well, it will interest you to know that NNPC remittances forms a major part of revenue shared in the Federal Allocation Committee meetings in Abuja. And this announcement will have telling consequences for the nation's economy, which relies on all receipts for most of its monthly expenses, including workers' salary. Well, to discuss this and, of course, more, I have joining me from our Abuja studios. He's an oil and gas policy consultant, Mr. Michael Faniro. Mr. Faniro, thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tolu. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I just read out the press release from the NNPC, but let's go to our discussion. They're saying that this just affects what goes to the Federation. I think a lot of explanations there. We'll go through that. But the NNPC has indicated that it will not remit zero allocation to FAAC in April and May 2021. In your terms as a professional, what is the broad implication of this? Mr. Faniro, did you get my question?
Can you come again? I lost that.
Okay, I said NNPC has indicated that it will not remit zero allocation to FAAC in April and May. What does this mean for the entire economy?
Okay, so we need to look at this in terms of the broader implication of this. And
yes.
We need to look at what are the causes of this. Okay.
Go ahead.
So the broader implication is that it reduced revenue to the state and to all the tiers of government, especially when you have the states, most of the states that depend on FAAC allocation for their revenue. If you look at the figure for 2019, we discovered that most of the states actually depend on FAAC for their revenue, for their budget performance. So you have states depending on FAAC for up to 89% of their revenue. You have the state like Bayelsa, who has about 89% of their revenue coming from FAAC. You have state like Borno, state like Taraba, who have like 88% of their revenue coming from FAAC. So if you analyze all the figure for 2019, for example, all the states combined together actually have about 66% of their revenue coming from FAAC. But the average does not do justice to that, because you have 15 states that actually depend up until 80%. So about 15 of the states have about 80 to 89% of their revenue coming from FAAC. About 14 states, about 8 states of that have about 70 to 79% of their revenue coming from FAAC. You have about 7 states that have their revenue coming from between 60 and 69 from FAAC. So it's only Lagos and Ogun that have the contribution of FAAC to their revenue is less than 50%. So Lagos has about 22.9, Ogun has about 35, then you have Rivers have about 53%. So what this means is that quite a lot of states might not be able to function without FAAC allocation. So once the FAAC allocation reduces, it's going to affect the state. And currently, some of these states cannot actually survive. If you look at some report that were done by Budget, we discovered that about 8 states cannot even meet their obligation. And when I'm talking about obligation, I'm just talking about recurrent expenditure and loan obligation, not even capital expenditure. So about 8 of the states cannot even meet their obligation with what they are even getting currently. So if you now see a reduction in FAAC revenue, so you can imagine what is going to happen to the states. So most of the states are not going to be sustainable. Most of the states cannot meet their obligation. And let me give a clarity on the FAAC revenue. The contribution of NNPC to FAAC is about 12% if you look at the 2020 figure. So, like NNPC has clarified, what NNPC is giving is not the totality of the oil and gas industry. Oil and gas industry contribute about 71% of what comes to FAAC. So about 5 components sources come into FAAC. So you have from NNPC, you have from DPR, you have from FRS oil and gas, you have FRS non-oil, and you have from VAT. So NNPC contribute about 12%, DPR contributes about 13%, FRS oil and gas contributes about 43%, non-oil contribute about 17%, and you have VAT contributing about 13% to make the total for based on the 2020 figure. So, but in a country where we are facing revenue challenges, 12% is a very big figure. Yes. So when these figures are not coming from NNPC, it has a very big and broad implication on the ability of the states to meet their obligations. In March, it was March that was shared in April. That was around 41 billion. The February figure that was shared in March, that was around 60-something billion. So, because if you look at the figure that NNPC is saying now about 111, 112 billion, so that means it's going to take like two months for them to be able to defray the cost of subsidy, for them to be able to give states. But the problem here is subsidy has not ended. So it means for the next few months, they might not be able to give any revenue to FAAC, because you just read in your news now that that crude oil has gone to $70. And we know that when the crude oil goes up, the price of petroleum product goes up as well. So the GMD has told us that the expected market price should be around 234 as of today. That means as crude oil price is going up, the price of PMS will be going up. That means the cost of subsidy will be going up. That means NNPC is going to be incurring more subsidy, and that will affect their ability to put any money into the FAAC coffer.
Now, Mr. Faniro, let me follow up with this. You can hear me clearly. The reason adduced, just like you said, is subsidy payments and under recovery from the sale of PMS. This has been a recurring issue. Now, what's the way out of it? And you touched on that now. Vis-a-vis, what's the status of the regulation? We hear we have a delay of another 5 months waiting for labor and all of that. What is really the status at the moment, and what's the way out of this?
Well, as it is now, there is no deregulation. We are still having under recovery or subsidy or whatever you want to call it. It's just a bit unfortunate that the state actually missed the opportunity to deregulate when it was the time to deregulate. I think government had a lot of opportunities to have deregulated, which it did not do. And again, we are going to be bearing the consequences of the inaction for those period, despite all the noise by the media, all the presentation, all the advocacy around the need for deregulation. And quite a lot of people think the subsidy only affects the federal government, but you can see it affects all the states, all the tiers of government. And subsidy payment is not fair to some states, because take the state of Ekiti, for example. How many cars are in Ekiti compared with the number of cars in Lagos? But again, it's going to affect them equally in terms of percentage of what they collect from FAAC. But again, it's a very difficult situation for government now. We must understand that, because if you are the president or you are the minister now, it's a very difficult decision for you to take on deregulation. The country is undergoing quite a lot of issues now. You have security issues. You have a lot of unrest. inflation is so high, food inflation is all there. So it's going to be a very difficult decision to deregulate at this point in time. I recognize that. But again, we have to look at what do we want to do. Are we going to continue in paying of subsidy, subsidizing consumption? And we know that subsidy is fraught with corruption, because in the subsidy, who is even getting the subsidy? I keep saying that the poor is actually subsidizing the rich. So what is even getting to the poor from that subsidy payment? So the people that we are subsidizing are the people who can actually afford the cost of PMS. So for me, I don't think subsidy is the way, but I know it's going to be a very difficult decision to be made by government. If you look at every other incidency, every other thing that's happening, all the moving parts in the country now, but it might get to a stage where the state will not be able to pay salary. They will run out of loan. So what do you do? By the time what you are using to pay subsidy is more than what you can even use to pay your salary. And most of these states, if you look at, they are not embarking on any capital project. They can barely pay the salary of their staff. So something needs to give. A decision needs to. It might be bitter, it might be difficult, but a decision needs to be made. Otherwise, NNPC in the next few months will continue. They will not be able to pay into FAAC allocation, because the subsidy fund, the subsidy cost is going to keep growing. As crude oil keeps growing, then the subsidy is going to keep growing.
All right. Let me now get your views in as part of moves to, of course, to cut costs and reduce our import dependence. We've allocated like 1.5 billion US dollars to repair our refineries. And some say this is the way to go. Some say, no, that's not the way to go. We know where we're on that for some weeks. But finally, that is a deal already. Now, what's your view about it? This time where we say we don't have funds, we can't, actualize all that we want to do.
I think everybody agrees that one of the solutions to this subsidy issue is actually to refine locally.
Yes.
We all agree that. But again, what's the process of this refining locally that quite a lot of people disagree with? And this is what the cause of this is, because of of history of how much we spent on this refinery turnaround every time over the years without any commensurate value from the refineries. I think where the mistake was made, and again we can't keep eating it, is when the reversal of the refinery was refined by the Yar'Adua administration. But you may not want to even blame, because the late President Yar'Adua was advised by these same people that instead of selling this, don't worry, we can turn around this refinery in 5 months. 5 months are turned to years now, the refineries are still not working. And because of that deficiency in trust, that's why a lot of us and a lot of people do not believe that government should actually put in any money in repairing the refinery. What we believe is that government should divest from the refinery, not total divestment, but should reduce its stake in the refinery, get private sector to come in, and let the private sector bear the cost of repair. Because before they can put in their money, they will believe that this money is going to come in. So people, what we disagree is that we should be putting money here, because after all the money that we spent on turnaround maintenance, and at the end of the day, you will hear one corruption case or the other in the turnaround maintenance. So even if we have mothballed this refinery for years, we would have been better off, because by the time you look at the cost we've sunk into this refinery versus the value of what we derive from the refinery, you see that we are in the negative. But then decisions have been made, so we are all looking and we hope and we are praying that that this will be different at this time around, that quite a lot of people will prove wrong, and the refinery will work, and again we can refine locally and keep reducing the cost of subsidy. But beyond that, another thing that I think we need to look at is the consumption volume. Currently, NNPC says is about 63 million liters per day in terms of consumption of PMS. A lot of us disagree with that figure. Because nothing actually, how we grew from 30 to 40 to 50 and to 60 without economic indication in the country, you know. So we need to look at that, because when you reduce the volume, then you reduce the subsidy. Not that NNPC is telling lie, but again, what I'm saying is that we need to we need to do a lot of monitoring so that we are not subsidizing the whole of West Africa. So most of the fuel that we are subsidizing actually find their way out of Nigeria. So, which means Nigeria is actually subsidizing the whole of West Africa. Because I don't believe that we consume up to 63 or 60 million liters per day of PMS in Nigeria. I don't believe, and quite a lot of people do not believe that, and a lot of reports do not believe in that. So we need to have an independent evaluation of that to determine what we consume. Then the other one is around efficiency in the value chain. Because when there is subsidy, there's going to be inefficiency for sure, and it is you and I that are going to be paying for that inefficiency, because it's going to be reflecting in the value of under recovery. So we need to be a bit more efficient in the way this is done.
All right, wrapping up this segment, what are we, or where are we with regards to PIB? I remember we talked about April. The lawmakers said we're going to get it passed by April. Today is the last day of the month of April. We have not heard anything around it. How does that come to you? What do you expect, or what are you hearing?
You need to know that lawmaking is a long process, especially in Nigeria. But from the information available to me, the National Assembly is on the last leg of passing the PIB. The committee on PIB from both houses have completed their work currently, so they are in the process of putting up the final report. And I believe in the next 2 weeks, this report should be laid in the House for consideration, for clause by clause consideration, and for passage. And this can take just 1 day or 2 days if there is sincerity of purpose. Then you need to see where they are not going to synchronize the bill. But again, both houses have been working together, so there will be no problem in terms of harmonization. So I think May is still possible in terms of passage of the bill. So I believe if in May, it should leave the National Assembly and go to the executive. So hopefully in May, let's see what happens. I believe this should be passed in May. Yeah.
All right. Then before I let you go, Mr. Faniro, you know, there's so much talk about energy transition in recent times. Now, what is the implication for Nigeria's oil and gas industry in its entirety?
Well, energy transition means there are a lot of substitutes for the fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Some of the developed countries are already putting targets 2030, 2015 when they are going to stop fossil fuel. But in our own side of the country, we might be using fossil fuel for a longer period. So that is it. But again, the opportunity for us here is the value addition to our products. We need to have petrochemical industry, and that is why I like the objective for the PIB, which is around value addition. In terms of crude demand, 50% of crude demand goes into transportation, but there are still 50% of it that goes into other things. The clothes I'm wearing now has a petrochemical ingredient in it. The camera we are using, the TV, has oil in it, has petrochemical. The TV that we are all watching has petrochemical. So we cannot, and there is no substitute. Renewable solar or whatever you call it cannot substitute all this. So it's an opportunity for us to develop value-adding industry, especially petrochemical. There is still market for it till infinity, because there is no substitute for all these things. In everything you use, where you are sitting at the table, in everything you are using, they are all petrochemical based. So you cannot substitute them with any other thing. So there is still market for our crude. But in terms of transportation, there's going to be reduction. However, Nigeria needs to develop its own policy on transition.
All right, it's a good way to leave it there. Oil and gas management policy consultant, Mr. Michael Faniro. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us. We appreciate this. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you very much.